Assalamu alaikum, my dear children. I am here with the continuation of the 14th lesson, that is fire and the wheel. In the previous video, we have learned about how the early man discovered the fire. How they discovered, children. The first fire they noticed were accidental, like lightning. It struck the trees, dry grass, and set the forest on fires. And volcanoes, it erupted and burnt everything around it. Right. So by these, they discovered the fire. Next, they learn how to make the fire. How? While making the stone tools, they observed that hitting two stones together produced a spark. So they started using to make the fire. And for the first time, there was a human-made fire, and now they could cook meat, keep warm, and keep wild animals away. Let's continue our discussion from here. That is, from collecting and hunting to grow food. For a long time, early human beings lived the life of hunter gatherers. They noticed that small plants grew into big ones. For a long period, children they lived like a life of the hunter gatherers. Means what, they used to gather the food and they used to eat them. Then they noticed that the small plants they grew into the big ones. They observed that the seeds that they threw away or dropped on the ground grew into new plants. Slowly they learned that whatever the seeds they used to throw after having the fruit or anything, that seed it dropped on the ground and grew into a new plant. They realized that they could sow seeds in the soil. Then that thinking led them to sow the seeds in the soil. With time, these grew into saplings and then into plants. Then with time, these grew into saplings. Means what, this seed it grew into a small plant. Sapling means a very young plant. Okay, then into a plant. They learned that it was possible to grow their own food, and that thing made them thought that it was possible to make their own food, grow their own food. Now they need not move from one place to another so often in search of food. Previously, they used to move from one place to another in search of food. Now, children, that's why they are called as a hunter gatherers, isn't it? But now they need not move from one place to another in search of food. So they became the first farmers also. So by sowing the seeds in the soil and growing the plant, they became the first farmers. As they started growing crops, the early farmers realized that soft soil and lots of water were needed to grow healthy plants. So as they started growing the crops, they thought that the early farmers, means the early people, they thought that for growing the plants they need a soft soil and lot of water. Therefore, they started to settle down near rivers and other water sources. Because of that reason, they started to live near the water places like the rivers, isn't it? By this, they became the first farmers. Farming changed the life of the early people in a big way. What is the meaning of farming, children? Farming means growing crops and food grains is called as farming. So this farming, it changed the life of the early people in a big way. How it changed, let's find out. In order to look after their plants, they started living in one place. So in order to look after the plants, they started living in one place. A group of farmers living in one place formed a small village. So to look after the plant, they need to live in one place. So they started to live in one place only. Previously, they used to move from one place to another in search of food, na? But now to look after the plant, to grow it well, they started living in one place. A group of farmers living in one place formed a small village, and slowly a group of people they were living in one place now, so it formed a small village. एक छोटा गांव बन चुका था. Then the first of shelters came up, which were tent-shaped huts made of animal skins, branches of trees, dry grass, and bones. Then slowly they came up with the house. Like they started to make small huts that was made up of the animal skin and the branches of trees, the dry grass, and the bones. They understood that some small animals were friendly and came near if they gave them food. Then slowly they also learned that few animals like the dogs and all, they were very friendly. If they came near and if they gave them food, they used to become their good friend. Thus, they began to keep small animals like sheep and goats for milk and meat. So, they thought of keeping the animals like the sheep and goats near them, and they used them for milking and meat. This is known as the domestication of animals. What is the meaning of domestication, children? Domestication means to train an animal to live with them and work for them. It's called as domestication. So, this is known as a domestication of animals. They also started to keep cows. It is believed that the dogs were perhaps the first animals to be domesticated. Then they started to keep the cows also, and it was believed that the dogs were maybe the first animal to be domesticated. At first they must have helped in hunting and later in taming the smaller animals. At first they must have helped in hunting, but later they started to tame the smaller animals. Tame means what? Domestic purpose. Okay, so by these learned to grow the food, and they started to make a small village and also started the domestication of animals. In the beginning, the early farmers plucked out the crop using their hands. Then they made a very useful tool which we now call a sickle. In the beginning, children, the farmers, means these early farmers, they used to pluck out the crops using their hands. But then slowly what happened, they made a very useful tool which we now call a sickle. Sickle means what? Daranti, like this. So they made this tool to pluck out the crop, made of wood and stone. This new tool was used to cut crops. So this sickle was made up of wood and stone, and they used this tool to cut the crops. At first they used stones and bones to dig the soil for planting seeds. And at first what they used to do for planting the seeds, they used to use the stones and bones. Much later they made the plow, a tool that made the planting of seeds easy. Then later what happened, this they made a tool called plow, like this it was. So they use this as a tool to for planting the seeds easily. As early people started living in groups, they learned to share work among themselves. Then they were forming the small villages, and group of people were living together, na children. So slowly they learned how to do the work in a easy way. They started to share their work. Then what happened, some worked in the fields, others built shelters, while some made pots and baskets to store extra food grains. So everyone were given a task, everyone were doing the work. Okay, some worked in the fields and other built the shelters, and some they made the pots and baskets to store the extra food. Then what happened, invention of the wheel. Invention means what? Making something new, entirely new, is called as an invention. Then how they invented this wheel means what? They, like this, it was used for the bullock carts. In the early days, it was difficult to carry heavy loads over long distances. The only way to do so was to carry them by hand or on the back. So in the early days, there were no transportation facilities, in children. There were no vehicle to carry the loads. So what happened? The early people, they used to carry the heavy loads for the long distances. Then what happened? The only way to do was to carry them by hand or on the back. The only way was they used to carry the load on by the hand or on their back. Early human beings observed logs of wood floating in rivers. Then they observed that the early people, they observed that logs of wood, लकड़ी के टुकड़े जो है वो पानी पे फ्लोट हो रहे थे, तैर रहे थे. Then that gave them the idea of tying logs together to make rafts. By looking at that thing, they got an idea of making the raft, children. Raft means what? Flat thing that is made by tying together the pieces of wood and used as a boat. By looking at that, they started to make the boats. Okay, this made moving across rivers possible. As time went by, they noticed that rounded logs of wood could roll on the ground easily. So by using the rafts, moving across the rivers was possible, children. Then as a time was passing by, they noticed that the rounded logs, like this, these are the rounded logs, this could roll on the ground easily, like this. Then they thought that it would be easy to carry heavy objects if they could roll them over these rounded logs. Then they got an idea of using these rounded logs to carry the heavy objects. They started rolling more than one log and moving goods on the rolling logs. Slowly, these shaped up to become the first hand carts. Then they started using more logs to move the goods. Okay, then they slowly, what happened? These shaped up to become the first hand carts, like this. Then they then thought of cutting off rounded shapes from logs of wood and fixing them to the carts. Thus, the carts with wheels were ready, and these could be pulled by human beings or animals. And there you have it, the wheel on which we depend on so much today. So by these ideas, what they did, children, they made a cart which could be pulled by the human beings or animals. Like this they made, and by this idea we got a wheel, right, children? It is the wheel on which we depend so much today. The wheels are used for transportation, isn't it, for moving from one place to another. Let's have a glance over the complete lesson, children. Early humans had discovered fire but were afraid of it. Slowly they realized that fire could be used for warmth, cooking, as well as to keep wild animals away. They learned how to make the fire by rubbing stones together. Once they learned to grow their own food, they did not have to travel from one place to another so often. And they were living in only one place, and it formed a small village there. They made long rafts to travel on water. Soon the first wheels were made by cutting circles out of logs of wood. Little villages came up as the first farmers settled down in one place to look after their crops. Well, that's it, children. It was the end of our 14th lesson. We'll catch up in the next video with the new lesson. Till then, stay safe, stay connected. Allah Hafiz.